Salutations and blessings, everyone. I hope that you are having a good 2021 so far. Today is January 7th, and we had quite the spectacle that was piped into our consciousness yesterday. As the U.S. Capitol, there was a march and a protest for the election, the election of Joe Biden. It was being certified yesterday, and obviously, if you're watching this and if you have any kind of screen in front of you for the last 24, 48 hours, no matter where you are in the world, you have seen the images, the event that happened yesterday. There was a couple of very interesting characters that were photographed breaching the perimeter of the most heavily secured kind of place in the world, especially now with all of the attention and protests that were happening there. It's interesting how that was allowed to happen, in my opinion, but it was this event situates us quite appropriately in what John David Ebert and Francis Culkin, working off of the term coined really by Jean Baudrillard, is hyperreality or hypermodernity, as they called it. And I'm going to read a little bit actually from John David Ebert's and Francis Culkin's book Hypermodernity, which has within it a wonderful preface by Michael Aaron Kamins, who is a poet and a kind of theorist as well. I'm going to try to have him on the podcast, the Roosters Crow podcast, as well as Francis Culkin. I'm actually going to have a conversation with him talking about the work of Rene Girard. But before I get into the book here, I'm going to read a little bit from the preface, the excellent preface that Michael wrote. I wanted to introduce and invite you guys to join this Facebook group that I started. It's called the Hyperconversation, which obviously touches on this theme of hyperreality. And I don't know really what's going to come of it. Probably nothing, but it's like kind of planting a seed just to see if something emerges out of it. And just a brief description that I wrote on the in the description for the group. This Facebook group is meant to be a sort of a content aggregator for the emerging hyperconversation. The intention is to share videos, writings, and dialogue that explore the new media landscape and the convergence of ideas around symbolism, culture, cognitive science, philosophy, and religion. The hope is to foster an environment for what cog-sci Professor John Vervaeke coined as reciprocal relevance realization. And that's really something that it's a fascinating term. It's one of those terms that crystallizes a lot of different things once you hear it. It's like it shows up to you, and it brings a lot of different things together. And it's something that I want to do a video digging into more of this concept of relevance realization and reciprocal relevance realization, and hoping that maybe this Facebook group or maybe another Facebook group or there are some that are obviously better than others, some that start and fizzle out, some that just become irrelevant. But I'm not a experienced Facebook group manager at all. So I'm going to put it out there and just start sharing content and see what happens. So I'd love for you guys to join us. I'm going to, again, put a link to the group in the description of this video here. So getting into the book quickly here, Hypermodernity and the End of the World. Reading from the back here. In their new book, Hypermodernity and the End of the World, John David Ebert, Francis Culkin, and Michael Aaron Kamins map out the cartography of hypermodernity, an epoch which the authors demarcate as having come into being in 1995 with the advent of the internet. As they travel across the digital medial landscape, the authors discuss the transformations wrought by hypermodernity across the domains of economics, politics, art, film, literature, and culture generally. The de-worlding of the human individual by computational technologies, wed together with neoliberal capitalism, is discussed in great detail, as well as the rise of the avataric subject, pandemic narcissism, the ominous significance of Donald Trump, data mining by privateers, the dissolution of community, the erosion of cultural values, and the eclipsing of the human by the abyss. It's all in here, the first ever thorough discussion of the implications of hypermodernity as a structurally distinct epoch from modernity and postmodernity. So buy your ticket, step right up, and strap you on your seatbelts and get ready for a wild ride. And it is a short book. It's in dialogue form. It's worth picking up. It's not expensive. And again, I had John on a couple of episodes ago. Going to have Brian on in a couple episodes as well. And Michael, hopefully, I've reached out to him as well. But let's read a little bit from the preface here. The first quote here put forth by Michael is, "It was the year when they finally immanentized the eschaton." The book of Revelation got nothing on this new apocalypse by Culkin and Ebert. They are no doubt the real hype of cultural criticism today. So was John of Patmos. One is the father of a new Americana of visionary criticism, and from a modest casita in Santa Fe, must be sitting on the most valuable literary estate of a generation. I mentioned this last point because with nearly 30 books and 500 plus YouTube videos, from film reviews and philosophy to poetry and commentary on the decay rate of virtually all cultural phenomenon, John David Ebert is still practically unknown beyond a small but international cult following and a tight circle of writers, artists, and meme madmen, aka the hypermoderns. Ebert can't even get his Wikipedia page restored. Has he not accomplished and suffered enough? Let's change that with this book. And Brian Francis Culkin is one of the rising stars of American critical theory. In the tradition of great expat writers, this once star athlete basketball from Boston, Massachusetts, escaped the U.S. drag for the jungles of Peru, like a virtual Colonel Kurtz. Culkin lives among the ayahuasqueros in the Amazon and writes his reflections on the heart of darkness of global capital. I suspect, like many of the best minds of our generation, Culkin turned on the DMT circuit in his brain, dropped out and tuned in, logged in to John David Ebert and the mesmeric nascency of this meme we call hypermodernity. And like surrealism or beatitude, this old term, which we probably saw once in some book by Paul Virilio, has been given a new meaning and power. The upstart Culkin, alongside Ebert's magisterial life's work of several decades now, has already made some laudable contributions. His books on the semiotics of boxing, Boston gentrification, the heroin epidemic, and the 45th U.S. president, amongst others, should give Ebert some hope that his unique brand of American visionary criticism will endure, and assure the reader that you couldn't ask for better guides to the landscape that has rapidly blown up around us since 1995, or the end of the world. A little bit more on the term hypermodernity here. Regarding this late modern condition of the hyper or hypermodernity, I consider Jean Baudrillard's theory of integral reality especially apt. So much so, in fact, we could just as well be talking about integral modernity if the modifier wasn't so fraught with annoying associations. By integral reality, Baudrillard meant something like the real and the imaginary collapsed together from the disappearance of their metaphysical barrier, e.g. the reality principle, after the advent of nihilism, to their absolute recurrence as hyperfolded virtual reality. I suspect that before metaphysics, quote, Western philosophy understood as Platonism, set all the binary distinctions that would characterize modernity, being and becoming, sensible, intelligible, subject and object. Our predecessors dwelled in a magico-mythical, pre-metaphysical hybrid reality, to adapt the word from Bruno Latour, from Plato to Descartes. This hybrid reality was divvied up with hard lines keeping the real and the imaginary apart. The latter, as theology, ensured the value of the former, and their sustained separation allowed the existence of a positive factual order, freed from contamination, quote-unquote contamination, by subjective factors and spectral phenomena. But between the scientific revolution and Nietzsche's word, God is dead, the sky, or suprasensible realm of metaphysical ideas and values, lost its supporting pillar, and fell into the earth. The imaginary collapsed into the real. And now, like the stellar sparks of the Gnostics, the imaginary recurs in the scintilla of electronification, in the proliferation of screens and images. The broken shards of the intelligible are incarnated into the smartification of objects. A little bit more here down the next page. There is perhaps no better example of hypermodernity, of a phenomenon that evidences Baudrillard's concept of integral reality, than the strange case of two books that have been brought to wide attention since Donald Trump became the 45th U.S. president. These are Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey and The Last President, both by author and occultist Ingersoll Lockwood. And if you're not familiar with this, it's quite fascinating that this book was written. Actually, I'll just read it here instead of trying to describe it here. Briefly, the titular Baron Trump is a child of a wealthy aristocratic family residing in Castle Trump. This is from the book, the actual book that was written in the 1800s, or I think maybe the late 1800s. He finds a book from the 15th century by a man named Don, who claims there is a world within the world, i.e. the hollow earth. The only point of entry, however, is a portal in Russia that Baron Trump sets off to discover with his dog Bulger. They do indeed find the portal and travel to several strange wonderlands throughout the hollow interior globe. One land they visit is the land of transparent folk. The inhabitants are in a constant light that shines through them like amber, requiring constant eyewear, like a steampunk-styled Google glass. This place, according to Lockwood, is called Goggle Land, Goggle. In Lockwood's other book, The Last President, a mogul who lives on Fifth Avenue, New York, wins the presidency as a populist. But riots then break out immediately on all sides, and he brings about the end of the Republic. These books seem like obvious Swiftian satire, with allusions to frequent items now in the mainstream media since Donald Trump became U.S. president. But the first book on Baron Trump was published in 1893. The Last President was published shortly thereafter, 1896. In the hypermodern chatter concerning these books, you can hear every kind of theory, no matter how translogical, that President Trump is Ingersoll Lockwood, that President Donald Trump, the latter having long extended his life through the occult arts, or that President Trump's grandfather secretly acquired a time machine built by Nikola Tesla, or some weird combination of theories, including the so-called Mandela effect in action. The imaginary no longer held in the sheltering sky or in check by the reality principle is now the semiotic excess, the hyper. The social reality augmented with it becomes hyperbolical, overdetermined, globally synchronized, and supersaturated with virtual beings. Even old quantum spooks loosed from their atomic age when we split holes in our ontology or absences. As we progress further into the post-truth hypermodernity, we could expect more high weirdness, like Trump and Ingersoll Lockwood. In hypermodernity, synchronicity replaces cause and effect. So just a little bit from the preface there for my hypermodernity. So I'm going to leave it there. I got some interesting things coming up that I'm excited to share with you guys. And again, if you're interested in joining the Facebook group, it's going to be, again, just sharing content, thoughts, and ideas that are converging around the hyperconversation, which I think is a kind of a way to get a foothold on the continuing, escalating virtual insanity that we are currently residing in. So thanks, guys. God bless, and we'll see you next time.